Now, if you look at some of the theological education changes that have happened, again, this is just not to vilify Southwestern or Southern or anybody, but to kind of just show you again how some of this stuff is working out in our theological education. Some of you are aware of this, some of you aren't. And I can talk about seminary because I've been there. I've got a degree from Southwestern, so I'm not criticizing something I don't know anything about. If you look at Southwestern now, you can get, if you're a woman, you can go to Southwestern, you can get an MDiv, Master of Divinity, with a Women's Studies concentration, or an MA in Christian Education with a Women's Ministries concentration, or you can get a Leadership Certificate in Women's Ministry, because they're convinced at Southwestern now that if you're a woman, you can't teach men, you can't be in any kind of authoritative position over men. So you can get these degrees, but you have to get them with the idea that you are going to be in women's or children's ministry. You're not going to be in pastoral ministry, because that's not something that women are qualified to do in that view. You can also do this at Southwestern. They've added this, which I think is, again, not the worst thing in the world, but kind of a step backward in time. They've added the Bachelor of Arts in Humanities with a concentration in homemaking. This is a degree, a bachelor's degree that they added for women, particularly wives of men who are coming to seminary to get a master's degree. They added this bachelor's degree in homemaking, something that schools haven't offered for years. But now we're back at Southwestern, you can get a degree in it. If you can just read this, the College of Southwestern prepare women to model the characteristics of a godly woman as outlined in Scripture. This is accomplished through instruction in homemaking skills, developing insights into home and family while continuing to equip women to understand and engage the culture of today. Now, let me say also, I have no problem and do not think it's backwards thinking for a woman to want to stay home and take care of a family and run a household. I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all. I have an adult daughter right now who had a baby this summer. She's not working outside of her home. She's staying home and taking care of that kid. I have no problem with that. I don't think there's anything weird or wrong about that. What I have a problem with, and what I think we ought to think about as people who are going to be leaders in ministry, is that the only role that women should be allowed to play? Or even is that the primary role that women should be forced to play? If you choose that as your primary role, that's a very different scenario than the church telling you that's your primary role, and that's all you can do. You can see there that if you get this degree, you're going to learn about nurturing and caring for the family, nutrition, food preparation, clothing and textile design. Okay, enough said about that. Let's look at what happens in our culture in some other places. These are some numbers that are still true, even though we've made some progress over the last 30, 40, or 50 years. Women make up 16% of the U.S. Senate and about 16% of the House of Representatives, which again is kind of strange if you think that women make up about half of the population or a little more, that women still are terribly underrepresented in our government. Now, just think about for a minute how different our legislature might be, how different our legislative process might be if instead of 16% of them being women, maybe 45 or 50% of them were women. We might see some very different stuff there, but women are terribly underrepresented. Women account for 16% of corporate officers in Fortune 500 companies, 5% of top earners, and only 2% of CEOs. Women make 50% of law school graduates, 33% of lawyers, but only 15% of law partners. Women still earn about 80 cents on the dollar compared to men. 2013, women earned 20 cents less. That's 20% less than men earn. for doing the same jobs. Even in jobs where women dominate, nursing, teaching, those types of things, men are still paid more. What that means is if you're a woman, you could earn up to $500,000 less over your lifetime simply because you're a woman. Last thing on this list, men negotiate their salaries more than women do. Women don't feel like they can negotiate. Women aren't expected to negotiate. Many people expect that if they offer a woman a job with a salary, the woman ought to feel like, I'm lucky to be getting this, and so there's no negotiation. Men have much more of a tendency to negotiate, and so they end up making more money. Still lots of inequity here. Now let's talk about something that may seem kind of silly to you, and it's not incredibly important again, but just to illustrate the cultural difference in the way we think about men and women. Let's say there are these two people. Let's say it's me and my wife, and they get married. Okay? When we meet, we're these two people. Okay? I'm Mr. Tom Copeland. That's the title that I had. My wife is called Miss because she's not married yet. Okay? Now that's already a difference, right? Because she's got a title that's going to change if she becomes married, because we're going to now identify her not just by who she was before, but by who she has become. Okay? So that's her name. Now, if we get married, she's going to probably become Mrs. Lori Copeland. Now, back in the old days, she would have become Mrs. Tom Copeland. My mother, my father's name was Tom, my mother went by Mrs. Tom Copeland for years. Her name was Mary Nell Copeland, and she went by Mrs. Tom Copeland for years. I have some friends who she identifies herself with her husband's name still. Mrs. something, she doesn't use her own name. Now, when we got married, that happened to Lori, but this happened to me. I didn't change anything. I'm still Mr. Tom Copeland, no different. Now, if she wanted to become kind of a feminist, she could do this. She could change from Mrs. to Ms. and kind of take a stand that says, I'm independent. I'm not dependent upon Tom for who I am. And so I'm going to call myself Ms. Okay? I, of course, don't need to do that. I'm still Mr. Tom Copeland, just like I was when I was single. Now, if my wife decided to divorce me, she could change her name back to Crosswhite. She could become Mrs. Lori, or Ms., excuse me. She could become Ms. Lori Crosswhite or Ms. Lori Copeland. When she gets divorced, she might want to ditch my name and go back to her other name. However, a lot of women don't do that, right? Because it's too much trouble, because they've already gone to the trouble of changing their name, and everybody already knows them as this person, and they don't want to change their name back. If we get divorced, though, I'm still Mr. Tom Copeland. I haven't changed at all. Now, if she gets remarried to someone, there's a really good chance she's going to change her name back. First of all, she's going to become a Mrs. again instead of a Ms., and she's going to change her name to the last name of her new husband. That's very typical. Of course, she doesn't have to, but she probably would. I'm still going to be the same person. No change for me. Now, let's say that she wasn't happy with this Jones character, and she said, I would like to get back with you. Well, then she would become Mrs. Lori Copeland again. Probably without question, I would still be Mr. Tom Copeland. Is that a big important deal? Probably not. Does it signify that women are still identified in our culture very differently than men are? Yes. What does that mean? Are women still property? Now, people don't always change their name, and I don't think it's horrible if you change your name. I don't think that means you're not a feminist, or you're not independent, or you're not a strong woman if you don't if you change your name. It's a trivial idea, but it's symbolic, and I want you to think about it, because I want you to think about how even though there are things that we think don't matter, they still send messages that men are a certain way and women are a certain way. Even in the titles that we use, even in the traditions that we kind of expect women to follow.